Hey everybody, it's Romania Black. So we are rounding out the month of June, which is designated as Pride Month. Although if you're in the LGBTQA plus community, every month is Pride Month, so do what you can with that. But anyway, I wanted to celebrate this month and talk about some series and review some movies that I thought would kind of fit and celebrate the theme of Pride Month. And so there is a movie that's going to be coming out. It's already out on Patreon, but I've been having trouble uploading it, but it should be up pretty soon that you guys will see on my channel. But in the meantime, I also wanted to talk about a series that I got into recently that I absolutely love. And that series is called Check Please. So on my Patreon, one of my fellow patrons, Esteban, he's really awesome. He has this blog called Comic and Queries, and I've gotten a link to it up here. You should definitely go check it out. He reviews different series that talk about LGBTQA plus relationships and if they're good or not, what the themes are, things like that. And I've stumbled across a few series through his blog that are really, really cool. But Check Please kind of drew my interest right off the bat because one, it's not a manga, it's a Western comic, but it is very much in the mindset of like a sports anime. However, there's romance, and it's boys love, and I love it, and I want to talk about it with y'all. So yeah, this is kind of an impromptu soapbox to talk about this series that I fell in love with a couple weeks ago. I got the first volume. As you can see, it's pretty big. It's got a lot of pages in it. And then I really liked it, and so I had to get part two, which there's two parts of this series so far, and then the author has made like several little like chapbooks, things like that to go along with it, which we'll talk about. But I really like these two books, and then one of my friends, it was his birthday this month, so I've been talking to him about Given, and he really seemed interested, so I went ahead and sent him these, and I was like, look, you should read these, and he said he really liked them. So we're going to talk about Check Please, why I like it, and if there's anything I would change about it, and just why I recommend this series, and you should be reading it. So yeah, let's talk about Check Please. So my big thing about sports anime, and I think a lot of you feel the same way about sports anime and sports manga, is yes, it's all about the camaraderie. It's all about the friendship. It's all about these group of guys or group of girls or whatever coming together under a common goal to win nationals or bring their team back from the brink of extinction or whatever the case may be. But with every sports anime and sports manga that I've watched or read, there's always been a romantic subtext. And you can go on Twitter, Tumblr, wherever, and you're going to find people doing fan art and shipping couples of guys together. But usually, unfortunately, because of how Japanese culture is, it's rarely confirmed, right? It's always hearsay, and it's like, oh, the mangaka is hinting heavily at it, but it's never confirmed, right? This is so confirmed. And I love it for it. So, talking about what the story is, the story follows Eric Biddle, who is our main character right up here in the corner, in the front page here. And Eric Biddle is a recent high school graduate from Georgia that goes up to the East Coast to Samuel University to play hockey. Now, Biddle is a figure skater. He is not a hockey player, but he knows enough about hockey and played hockey in high school so that even though he's known for as being a champion figure skater in high school, he submits his video and gets accepted onto the hockey team because the coaches are impressed with his agility and his ability to move and do well with his hands. So obviously Biddle's short and not exactly the physical stature of most hockey players, so he finds adjusting to the team at first very difficult physically, but also finds it a little bit challenging at first because Eric is gay. And he's very much in the midst of a bro-y culture that he feels is not at all like what he's used to or that fits his personality. Eric likes to bake. He likes Beyonce. He's very much not in tune with what a lot of the guys in the house, as it's called, Haus, are dealing with hockey and very bro-y issues. So it starts out with Eric being kind of the fish out of water and trying to adjust to the team. And of course, the one person that gives him the hardest time is the team's captain, which is Jack Zimmerman. And Jack Zimmerman, oh my God, he's amazing. He happens to be the son of an NHL hockey player who's won the Stanley Cup 3 times. And he has a lot on his shoulders in terms of standing in his father's shadow. And there's a really, really good part of the story early on that kind of sets up Jack's character, and being that Jack was a good hockey player in high school, and then it's hinted at, very heavily hinted at, although we don't get exact confirmation, but the audience can kind of piece together that Jack was really, really stressed and afraid of failure his whole life. So he started taking anxiety medication. And then Jack nearly overdoses in high school. And that causes him to lose a lot of contracts for universities, things like that. So he decides to go to the university of his mother, which is Samwell, to try to regain the glory of his father's, what he's expecting of him, and then get into like a professional pro league. And as they do a little comic story right off the bat, very early on, that goes from Jack's perspective, and it's kind of written like a fairy tale. And it's saying like, so Jack went back to his mother's kingdom to try to regain the glory of his father and his father's honor and pride and everything. And things were going well until this little shit came along. And it's him basically seemingly at odds with Eric Biddle, who they call either Biddle or Biddy throughout the story. But it kind of develops into something else. Like maybe Jack isn't totally antagonistic towards Biddle for no reason at all. Maybe there's a reason behind it. But anyway, so before I go any further, we need to talk about the characters. I've kind of talked about Eric a little bit, but like I said, Eric is a figure skater who turns into a hockey player. He does come out as gay very early on in the story to the audience, and I like what they do is, as a narrative tool, they make Eric a YouTuber, basically. He's like a video blogger, and they make to where he's doing these video blogs of his times at university. And so he's talking to us, the audience, the readers, but it's meant to be like he's talking to his YouTube audience. And so early on, a lot of the guys on the hockey team are like, oh man, Biddle, what's your type? And he's like, men. And he comes out very early on to his audience, and he's like, it's very hard to fit into this like bro culture at this university because he's not come out to anybody. And so he doesn't know what to do. And so there's a plethora of characters who we'll talk about very shortly, but he ends up coming out to one of the characters, and they're very supportive of him, and it kind of helps him ease into being himself on campus and being himself around the team, and then that helps their team kind of move on and push further. And Biddy's big thing is that he's very afraid of contact. Early on, we established that when he was in high school, he played football, and he was constantly bullied and constantly knocked to the ground. And then at the series climax, we kind of figure out that, it was more than just regular bullying, like the names that they called him and things like that. And so Biddy has a very kind of like traumatic experience with that. And so when he plays hockey, he's all the time afraid of being checked or pushed up against the wall. And his coach and them are trying to push him past that. But I love Eric's character, one, because he's very, very Southern. Like you can read it in the text that he has a very Southern accent, and it comes out where he's like, oh honey, and bless your heart and sweetheart. And I'm like, I know people like that because I am from the South, so I understand that accent. It's wonderful. But he loves baking. He decides to transform this college frat house kitchen into like a kitchen where he can bake all the time, and he bakes and makes jams and makes stuff for his team, and that kind of helps them come closer. But he's also, as he goes through college, this series follows him from freshman year to senior year of college, and he transforms from being kind of shy and awkward and unsure of himself into a character that is very open with his personality and his identity. And because he's open, he's able to attract people and make friends, and they accept him for who he is. And there's a lot of themes I want to talk about with this as well, but I love Biddy as a protagonist just because he's not perfect. He's not a Mary Sue or a Gary Stu or anything. He's not a perfect person. He does have his flaws. He reminds me, I did a soapbox on Yuri on Ice recently, and some people in the comments were talking about Yuri being a frustrating protagonist at times because he's so down on himself and just can't move forward. He seems to constantly get in the same rut and doesn't move forward. I would argue that this is where Biddy makes that improvement, because Eric Biddle, is a lot like Yuri in a sense that he starts out very unsure of himself, and he has a lot of issues with his appearance, with his sexuality, things like that. But as the story goes on, he becomes more accepting of himself. He becomes more outwardly open with his personality and what he likes and how he is as a person, and it allows his interactions to become more meaningful and have more power. And as the story goes on, he just becomes more sure of himself. So by the time you get to his senior year, like book 1 talks about freshman and sophomore year for Eric and him like coming to terms with who he is, and then junior and senior year of college for Eric is in book 2, and it's about him. He's figured out who he is, and now it's about him affirming. And what does he do with that? Like, what does he want to do after college? How does his relationships go? We'll talk about that. it becomes him, this story becomes him becoming comfortable with himself and helping others to feel comfortable with themselves too. So it's like him paying it forward in the second book. And so I argue that whereas some people think that in Yuri on Ice, his character doesn't quite change as much as he should, this character does. And I really, really appreciate that. I also want to note that in the cover art, you can see that Eric is kind of at the forefront here and his team is all behind him. There's this separation between him and his team. Whereas by the second book, by the time he's sure of himself, his team is all at the forefront with him, especially Jack. Jack's amazing. Everybody needs a Jack in their life. So, and it becomes him just kind of coming together with his friends and his family, and that being a support network for him. So it's really, really good. But yeah, I love Eric Biddle. He's such a wonderful character. Him baking his pies, working on his thesis, loving Beyonce, and just being himself. I really, really love it. And I love how his character is just so determined to be like, no, I'm going to do this. And he doesn't give up, which is really, really wonderful. So then we have Jack Zimmerman. Oh, Jack Zimmerman. Sweet, sweet Jack Zimmerman. How do I love thee? I know no French, but Jack is French-Canadian. So he speaks French quite a bit in the book. And so I don't know any French. So when he's speaking French in the book, I have no clue what him and his father are saying. Him and his father talk quite often in French, but you get the idea behind it. And then anytime that there's French spoken that's translated into English, it's in little word brackets, so you can kind of understand what they're saying. But Jack is a very, very interesting character. He's the character that starts out as the antagonist, like he's very critical of Biddy. Like the first thing he says to him is like, you need to eat more protein. And Biddy's like, bitch, you did not. And it's great. But Jack starts out, you think he's just this antagonist that really doesn't like Biddy. And the more the first part of the story goes on, the more you see like, oh, Jack, do you really not like Biddy, or do you kind of like Biddy and you don't know what to do with these feelings? And so Biddy comes out as gay quite early on in the story, but Jack is pretty much bisexual. Jack is a pretty much bisexual character, but even he seems kind of unsure totally of his feelings for Biddy until his graduation, which is at the end of book 1. And I won't spoil things for you all. I want you to go out and read the book. I really do. But he kind of comes to terms with those feelings and he acts on them, which is great. In most sports manga that I've read, even if it's like a subtext or hinted at, there's no action. It's just the fans going, oh, okay, well, they clearly love each other, OTP, but there's no action. There's action in this. And I love it because they actually talk about their feelings, and there's moments, there's kissy moments, y'all. I can't express to you how wonderful that is to see it in a published work. It's totally fine. It's just two people loving each other. Love it. Absolutely love it. But Jack's character is interesting because whereas Biddy is doing hockey because he wants to do it and because it's something to extend his figure skating career past high school, Jack has a very clear reason why he's doing hockey. He's doing it to become a pro player, to become like his father. And his father isn't a bad person. They call him Big Bad Zimmerman in the story, but he's not a bad person. He's actually quite supportive. It's just there's this clout that he has, and he's a professional hockey player who's won the Stanley Cup. So everybody has this definition of what a great player he is, and everyone's constantly comparing Jack to him. So it's not that Zimmerman's father's a bad person, it's just there's this shadow that Jack kind of has to overcome. And another good thing about this story is that they don't always win. There's lots of losses in here, and how do these characters deal with the losses that they have, and what do they do with it? So I like the idea that we get to see in the first half, because Jack is 2 years older than Biddy. So when Biddy comes in as a freshman, Jack's a junior. So we see in the first novel, we see Jack's junior and senior year and Biddy's freshman and sophomore year. And then the second one, we see Biddy's junior and senior year, and we see Jack's 2 years out playing professionally. And so it's really, really good. I just love Jack's character. He's kind of robotic at the start of it, and everybody kind of complains that, oh, it's just Robot Zimmerman. But when you think about it in hindsight, him having that issue with his overdose and with all the pressure he's under, you kind of get why he's like that at first, and then he slowly warms up to everybody. That by the end of the series, even his friends are commenting, they're like, man, you and Biddy in a relationship together, they're like, it's really changed you for the better. And he's like, mm-hmm. And again, I'm not going to spoil you on what happens because I want you to go out and get this book because you should. But it's really, really nice. It's a very happy ending, and we'll talk more about that. So there are a ton of characters in this story. It's very much like Haikyuu or like any other sports manga series where you have a ton of different teammates. And I'll be honest, some of the teammates I forget the names of because there are just so many of them. But I do want to highlight some of my favorites. One of my favorites, I won't reveal you his actual name because you'll find out at the end. He goes throughout the whole series known as Shitty. Like, that's just his name. His name is just Shitty. That's his nickname. And he's going to law school. He's going to law. He's trying to get into Harvard Law School, and he is kind of like the sage mentor of the group. He's the same age as Jack, and him and Jack are really good friends. But he's kind of like the sage mentor and the leader of the frat house. He's wonderful. He's crass, but like treats it like he's like the old sage uncle of the team, and he's really wonderful. But yeah, they call him Shitty the entire time, and you find out at the end of the series what his actual name is, and he's like, eh. But I really like Shitty's character in terms of he's actually the person that Biddle comes out to in the series, and he's like, oh yeah, he's like, it's fine, it's totally cool. Like, he's so supportive and instantly okay with Biddy being gay. And Eric's like, oh, well, you really accepted me. And he's like, you're like the fifth person that's came out to me this semester. So you get to find out that Shitty has a really endearing personality, and so people just feel like they can be open with him. And he's like, yeah, no, it's fine. He also has if you go on Wikipedia, they say maybe it's romantic relationship with the team's manager, who her name is Larissa. They call her Lardo, Larissa Duan, and she is an art student who is also the team manager for the team. And her and Shitty kind of have an implied romantic relationship. But she's wonderful too. She's like the stereotypical female manager for the team, but she takes no shit. She's like all business, like fun, really cool and crass with the guys. Like, she just fits in very, very easily to the environment of the series. And she's absolutely wonderful. I love her in the series. And then you have the other characters as well. You have Ransom and Holster, which are two characters that are like best friends. They become co-captains together after Jack graduates, and they're basically the broiest of the bros. They are so bros, and I love them because they're kind of like, they share a brain cell. They're just these dumb frat bros that play hockey, but they're so endearing, their friendship. And they constantly make commentary throughout the series. So I know nothing about hockey. The author of this series, who's on the back, Ngozi Ukazu, she's on the back there. She's a big hockey fan, and so she researched a lot of hockey for this series. And so Holster and Ransom are kind of our audience explainers. They kind of explain hockey to us. They explain the lingo. They explain how rules work in hockey. And they're kind of our surrogate to explain the exposition as far as hockey goes, so that we understand what's going on during a game. And so they do a lot of explanations throughout the series. Like, they explain what's going on in the frat house. They explain what it means by when a hockey player does this and that. The series pokes a lot of fun at hockey player interviews, which I find very endearing, because if you ever watch a sports interview, you see how hockey players, and really any sports person, they're like, yeah, it was a great game. We were really focused. We were doing this. Really good guys, great team, go Falcons. It's great. But they kind of poke fun at it and say that's kind of like the hockey interview type. And so they're really wonderful. Other characters in the series, I like that Biddy and Jack are not the only gay relationship in the series. There's two characters named Ollie and Pacer, Wicks, that are freshmen along with Biddy that join at the same time, and they actually get married to each other at the end of the series. Like, they get together as a couple. And so it's really, really cute that we get to see more. We get to see a plethora of different sexualities represented in the story, but it's cool that Biddy and Jack aren't the only relationship that are official in the series. Ollie and Pacer are as well. And then some of the later characters that come on once Biddy's a junior and senior, we have Dex, Poindexter, we have Nursey, Chowder. I like that Nursey, Chowder, and Dex come on during Biddy's sophomore year, which is really cool. And they're a lot of fun. Nursey and Dex are really cool foils to each other. They're kind of like, they remind me a lot of Nishinoya and Tanaka from Haikyuu in their personalities. They're just very like, Poindexter comes from like not a wealthy family. He says he kind of like paid for his hockey gear by working over summers on his dad's like lobster boat. But Dex is like really straightforward, kind of like says it like it is, and Nursey's a little bit more flowery with his language, a little bit more goofy. and Nursey's from New York City. So it's cool seeing all these characters come from different locations. Like Biddy's from Georgia, Nursey's from New York City, he is from Maine, and then we get to a character named Whiskey, which I'll talk about in a minute, and he's from like out at Arizona, California, that area. And so you get to see all these characters come from different locations to this college to play sports, and you kind of get all those personalities and regions clashing in really cool ways. But yeah, it's kind of hinted at that Nursey and Dexter have a kind of relationship with one another. It's sort of hinted at. Dexter and Nursey follow very much the what we think of when we read sports anime and sports manga. It's that whole ficky shipping thing where you're like, oh, Dexter and Nursey. Like, that's what we would expect out of a sports manga, like that kind of subtext. But in here, not necessarily with Dex and Nursey, but we do get it validated with other characters, which is a lot of fun. And then I really like that during Biddy's senior year, we get some players come on, and their nicknames are Tango, Whiskey, and Foxtrot, which is like Whiskey, Tango, Foxtrot, which is really, really clever by the author. But you have Tango and Whiskey, who are the two hockey players, and then Foxtrot, her name is Denise. She comes on as the replacement manager for Lardo. So Tango is pretty straightforward as a player. I don't really have much to say about him, but Whiskey is an interesting character, because by the time you get to the second book, Biddy has come out as gay, and he's in a relationship with Jack, which I won't spoil you the kissy scenes and stuff. You need to just go read the book or read it online. I've got a link down below to the webcomic too, if you want to do that. But so Biddy and Jack are in a relationship, as you can see by the cover here, because they're together, by the start of the second book, and Whiskey comes on, and Whiskey's character is interesting because he's very standoffish against Biddy at first, and Biddy can't figure out why. He's like, why are you standoffish? And then there's a scene at a frat party where he kind of sees Whiskey with another man, and he's like, oh, and it's this really cool moment of Biddy being like, okay, well, do I talk to Whiskey? What should I do? And Whiskey kind of avoids him. And by the end of the series, Whiskey's like, hey, thanks for being respectful to me and not prying into my personal business. He's like, I have a girlfriend right now, and I'm trying to figure out who I am. So he's still questioning his sexuality and questioning, who he is. But he says this really cool line. He's like, I just want you to know I'm not like you, and I can't do things the way that you do. And it's a nice moment between these characters, because Biddy this whole time has been like our only openly gay character on the team other than Jack, which Jack's bisexual. And so Biddy's kind of felt like he's his own, like, not a token person, but he's his own person in the series, and then it's just him and Jack. And then, Ollie and Wix come out later, but it's kind of implied throughout the series, but Biddy's kind of the open person, like, that's openly expressing his sexuality, and Whiskey at the end is like, that's just not me. Like, I'm still questioning myself, and I might be gay, but I don't know for sure yet, or I might be bisexual, I don't know. He's like, but I respect you, Biddy, for not prying and making that open with others, because you find out Whiskey's a pretty private person. And I like that. I like that we get multiple types of people represented, and the idea that it's not cool to make someone forcibly say stuff about their sexuality. It's cool that Biddy is respectful of him, because he's like, well, how can I help? And Whiskey's like, well, you helped by not prying and just letting me sort things out and being respectful. And I really appreciate that about him as well. And then you also have a few other characters. You have Hops, and then Bully. Bully is a character that I really like because he comes in with like this flowing hair, kind of like Shitty, and he rides a motorcycle. And in one, they have a thing called hazing that they do. And in one instance, Biddy, his senior year, hazes the boys, and he makes them dress up as Beyonce from Single Ladies and do the dance on the ice. And Bully does it perfectly. And Biddy's like, oh, awesome, yay. So it's a lot of fun. The humor in this series is absolutely wonderful. I laughed so much reading this, especially with like some of the clever dialogue. If you've ever been to college and you see frat bro culture, there's so many moments I was like, oh my God, I've seen those guys. I know exactly what they're talking about. This is great. But then Biddy's wonderful love of pies and Beyonce is just on display. Like, he sings Halo in the shower, and this is early on in the series. This is like back in this book. He's singing Halo in the shower, and him and Jack are not in a relationship yet, but Jack like gets so annoyed by his singing, like he pushes up with the shower curtain, and he's like, Biddy, and he's like, oh my gosh. He's like, stop singing. It's wonderful. And then we have also Lewis and then the staff. And then there's friends that they have around. Alicia Zimmerman, Jack's mom, she's an actress. We have Bad Bob Zimmerman, the dad. And then we have Biddy's parents, too, from Georgia, who, his mom and dad, his dad being the very stereotypical Southern dad in a story. His dad at the beginning reminds me of the father in Glee, whose son is gay, and I haven't watched Glee in years, but I remember that he reminds me a lot at first of the dad of the character in Glee that comes out as openly gay, and at first I'm like, oh, are we going to go that route? But he's a lot more nuanced than that. We get a lot more out of him, and it's a nice commentary on just kind of his parents becoming accepting of, or maybe they've been accepting of Biddy all along, they just haven't been able to vocalize it. And it's a really cool look at his parents, that Biddy's afraid that they're not going to accept him, or that they're going to tell him he's wrong, or messed up is how he refers it to in the story. And they don't quite go that way, which I like. I like that it's not your stereotypical parents being like, we don't approve. It's not like that at all. It's a bit more nuanced in that they approve of Biddy and they love Biddy, but it's them coming to terms with something that they're not familiar with. And I think it's handled in a really good way. And then we have, once Jack graduates, we meet the people on the Falconers team, which he joins. And there's not really, I don't want to spoil with the characters, but I will say that Alexei Mashkov, or Tater as they call him, he's a Russian hockey player that joins, that's on the team with Jack. And he's great. I love Tater. Tater is wonderful. Like, he doesn't speak very good English, and so his English is kind of broken, but it's so endearing. And him just like, he becomes obsessed with Biddy's jam making abilities. It's wonderful. I won't spoil it for y'all. And then there's Kent Parson, who I do want to talk a little bit about Kent Parson. So there's a character named Kent Parson, which I'll show you guys pictures of him. And he was Jack's best friend when they were younger in high school, and they played hockey together all the time. And Biddy finds out early on, and that's kind of Biddy's first foray, because in the story, this doesn't really spoil much, but Biddy has a horrible revelation early on in the first book that he has a crush on Jack. And he's very scared because he's like, you shouldn't fall in love with a straight guy. And so he's worried that his love is not going to be reciprocated. And then a few scenes later, he finds out that Jack and Kent might have had a thing together when they were in high school, because there's a frat party and Kent and Jack get kind of cornered up in a room by themselves. And Biddy, through various circumstances, ends up accidentally overhearing their conversation. And Kent's like, oh, I miss you, and stuff like this. And so the audience can kind of put together two and two that Jack and him probably were in a relationship together, and it just fizzled out and didn't work. And so now Kent's playing NHL for Las Vegas, and he wants Jack to come play with him, but Jack doesn't want to, and it's this whole thing. But Kent's character is very, very interesting. And there's a scene later on in book 2, because Kent does hurt Jack's feelings quite significantly, and Biddy was there to hear it. And there's a scene later on. What I like about Kent's character is that as an antagonist, he's not in the series a lot, but when he is, you feel that antagonism. And the scene where Biddy and Jack kind of come forward with their relationship, Kent has a very visceral response to it. And Kent kind of comes to see them and talk to them about it. And Biddy confronts him. Jack's not there when he confronts him. It's just Kent and Biddy. And Biddy offers him pie because he's polite like that. But he confronts Kent and he's like, you said these awful things to Jack and made him feel worthless when, and Biddy basically implies like when he nearly killed himself from an overdose. And it's implied that Biddy thinks that it was a suicide attempt. And he's like, you told him he was worthless and tried to put him down when he just came off of that horrible incident happening to him. He's like, do you realize what you've done? And Kent kind of gets confronted about it, and they talk it out, and it's not overly angsty. It's not this put on fake, like they're not just yelling at each other. They have a genuine conversation like you would in real life. That's the thing I like about this series, is that the conversations, a lot of times when you watch a show or read a book, the conversations can be over dramatized to the point where it seems like angsty and melancholy. But in this, it's very realistic. Like the conversations that happen are ones that would happen in real life. And I appreciate that about the book, because it deals with these issues that are a bit heavy in a realistic way, which I like. But yeah, Kent's a very interesting character, and I'm not crazy about his character at all, but he's a good antagonist because I think that his presence in the story strengthens Biddy's character, and it strengthens Biddy's relationship with Jack. So, with that being said, I do want to talk about the relationships because they're so wonderful in this. Obviously, Jack and Biddy's relationship takes the forefront. It's so good. It's so good. I absolutely love their relationship, and it's kind of like when the story starts. I didn't even think of them getting together at the very beginning. I was like, man, Jack's just kind of a dick to him. And then the more it went on, I was like, oh, this is what she's doing. This is what the author's doing. We're building this relationship up. And it seems unlikely, but the more you see these characters together, the more they really complete each other. Like, they're not polar opposites, but they're not very similar either. Jack and Biddy have a lot of differences, but they both are really big into hockey. They're both really supportive, dedicated characters that care a lot about the people around them, and they just are very supportive of each other. And I kind of love that. So there's other romances too in the story. Like I said, Ollie and Pacer end up getting together, and then there's Shitty and Lardo. There's whatever Holster and Ransom have going on. There's whatever Dexter and Nursey have going on. And then there's other relationships that are kind of hinted at and set up throughout the story, which I find really, really interesting. But I like that in this sports story that has so much going on with it in terms of hockey. And it's a pretty dense book. There's a lot of pages. That it still has time to talk about romance and do it in a very cute and fluffy way. Now, with that being said, I have found out that she's done a series called Huddle, which is a little side series, and there is some not safe for work things that go on in Huddle. So if you read this series and you're like, man, that romance was really innocent and cute, but I want something spicier, you should go buy Huddle because they're not long. I think it's only like 30 pages worth of extra stuff, so it goes by really quick, but it's some steamy bits. I'm just saying, some steamy bits. I've got volumes 2 and 3, and whew. I was like, oh, okay, well, Jack and Biddle are in a full-fledged relationship. Good to know. And she's also doing some side stories. There's one I'm really interested in, which is their summer together, Jack and Biddle's summer together. And I really kind of want to read that eventually when it becomes commercially available. But the comedy in the story is wonderful. I love how Ngozi does panels of Eric just being just freaked out and stressed. It's really, really cute, especially as he gets closer to his thesis being due his senior year. There's some really good comedic moments there. But I also like the fact that the comedy, very early on, the frat bro humor, I was like, oh, is this going to be a thing throughout the entire thing? Because it's very, it establishes early on that these are frat bros that Eric is living with, and he's like, ugh. But then as the story goes on, you get more and more into these characters, and the stereotypical frat bro humor kind of gets thrown out the window, and it's replaced with the humor surrounding these group of friends. It's almost like you're reading a whole book of inside jokes, and since you're the reader, you feel like you're on the inside and you understand them. But the big theme that I want to talk about with this story, and the reason I think I love it so much, is the idea of acceptance, support, and forgiveness. Because those three things are so paramount in this, and it's such a positive story. I feel like a lot of times stories are angsty or dramatic just for the sake of being angsty and dramatic, and this one isn't. It's really, really positive. And early on, when Biddy comes out to Shitty, I love that their names rhyme too, but when he comes out to him, he's instantly supportive. He's like, yeah, no, we're good. And then there is this moment where Ransom and Holster are trying to figure out what girl is Biddy's type, and they're like, it's a girl that bakes, and Shitty's like, you guys are morons. But Jack and Biddy, when they first start dating, they have a lot of reservations. They're like, what do we do? What will our friends say? And so they kind of edge into the waters to reveal themselves being in a relationship to their friends. And their friends, the first thing they do is they're like, okay, who won that bet? Who won this? Okay. And they don't care. It's all, they're like, oh yeah, we totally support you guys. So there's no angst. There's no melodrama. It's just, there is a little bit of melodrama because Jack and Biddy, through circumstances I won't spoil because you need to read this series again, it gets revealed to the public that they're dating, and then the press gets into this field day of Jack being like, oh, you're the first openly gay NHL player and blah, blah, blah. And so it talks about that and the pressure that people put on them. And it's kind of sad because the outside world is putting a lot of pressure, but their family and friends are not. So it's like our family and friends accept us as we are, and it's the outside, the people that we don't know on that level that are putting all this stress. But that leads to, like, Jack's family is instantly supportive. Like, they're very supportive and open about him being in a relationship with Biddle, which is great. And then we deal in the second book with Biddle coming to terms with his sexuality with his parents, especially his father. Like, his mother's instantly supportive, and it's his father that he worries about. And like I said, you think it's going to go one way, and the story does a whole lot deeper, more interesting angle with the dad than I thought they were going to do. And I really, really appreciate that. So it just handles acceptance. And even Biddy's conversation with Kent towards the end, where he kind of like, they have this conversation about how awful Kent was to Jack. At the end of the day, Biddy's like, I'm still going to forgive you, and you're not, unworthy of kindness. Like, I'm still going to be nice to you. I'm just probably going to say, bless your heart, like a little bit, because that's like the Southern way of saying, if you say, oh, bless his heart, it's like the most condescending thing you can say. And it's wonderful how Biddy uses it in this. But overall, I really love the message of positive support that it has, and the idea of acceptance and thriving in a world. There, at the very end of the book, like the last page of it, it's not going to spoil anything to say it, but at the last, when she dedicates the book to people, she said, this is dedicated to my mom, my dad, and to every reader, and to anyone who wants to thrive in a place where the world says they can't. And then there's this little picture of them kissing at the end. It's adorable. It's adorable. I love it. But I love that. I just love that idea of acceptance and support that this story gives off. It's just absolutely wonderful. So, is there anything I would change about the series? I think this is intentional on the author's part because, like I said, she's doing a whole series. The story started out as a webcomic, so it was released in chapter segments, and it feels like that. There's several parts of the story where a significant amount of time has passed, and you as the reader just have to accept it. Like, it may go to, like, there's one instance in here where it's right before the last game, and then the story cuts to the last game, the end of the last game. So there's stuff that you don't see as the reader that you kind of have to use your imagination to piece together. And the author does a really good job, Ngozi does a really good job of using imagery to convey emotions without words throughout, but it is something where this has been a week by week or month by month release. And so it feels like that when you read it. It feels like each chapter is its own segment, and they all tie together, but there's a clear delineation. There's a clear amount of time that has passed between each chapter. So if you're somebody that likes seeing things happen episodically, you'll probably be okay with it. If it's somebody that you want a clear narrative that just flows from point A to point B, it may take some adjusting to, especially when you see that a large amount of time has passed between chapters. And you're like, oh, 5 weeks have passed? What happened in those 5 weeks? That can be an adjustment. And so that's probably been the thing that I will only critique the most, is that I just want that. I want to see what happened in between. But like I said, for example, at the end of this book and in between these books, there's a summer that's happened that we know nothing about. A summer has happened in between these two books that we know nothing about. But Ngozi has said she's making her own little book that's what happened over that summer. So I'm like, okay, the author is going to fill in the blanks for us as she goes. And I want to say she's done Kickstarters where she's done like series of books where it's been like Biddy's freshman year. So it's like everything from this first book that's all about the freshman year plus extra moments, stuff that she couldn't show us in the webcomic. And I'm like, okay, I get that, author. I get what you're doing there. But that's probably the only thing that I would change, is that the story happens in snippets and it doesn't quite flow like you traditionally think a story would. But if you go into it knowing it was a webcomic and knowing that it's all tied together, then I don't think it's going to bother you at all. Overall, it doesn't bother me because I'm like, it's worth it just to read it and to see this beautiful romance and coming of age. And I like that it's a coming of age in college story, right? It's not high school, it's college. And so I like that because I feel like if you've gone to college before, your high school days are its own thing. And a lot of people look negatively back on high school because you're stuck with these people that you've known your whole life, that you don't get to choose. You have to be with them whether you like it or not. And then once you get to college, everything's so open, you can kind of pick who your friends are and you can pick who you interact with, and you kind of find yourself in college. And I feel like that's Biddy's story. It's Biddy finding himself amidst these people, and it's really, really well done. So I really, really appreciate that. But yeah, I wanted to talk about this series because after reading it, I've reread this series probably 2 or 3 times in the last couple weeks. It's just so wonderful. It's so validating to see a series with this much volume and this much uh, attention to it that celebrates a relationship between these two characters that you normally don't see in Western productions. And so I hope that we get to see more of them, and I hope that she continues this series, even if it's just little extra add-on things like that, because I'll definitely support it. So if you get a chance, like I said, I've got the link down below to the webcomic. You can read it from start to finish on your own. I've also got a link to Esteban's Comic and Queries. He's got some really good other series if you want to check those out. They're a little different than manga, a little more Western based, but still really, really good. And then if you do get a chance, check out the book. It's really, really good. It's beautiful. There's like so many pages. There's like 200 and something pages in this. It comes with like tweets at the end that Eric's done because Eric's really big on Twitter. And it comes with some extra comics. And it's just a really, really beautiful book. I absolutely love it. So yeah, that's Check Please. My little foray into Western sports comics. I love it. But yeah, like I said, I hope y'all have a happy Pride Month. There's still going to be other stuff that I review later on, like the Given manga. I'm going to do a soapbox on it eventually and other things. But I hope you guys have had a great month of June. And I hope that y'all have a great rest of the year as well, because Pride doesn't extend to just June. It's all year long. So thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all have a wonderful week and weekend. Please let me know what you think down below. And as always, stay safe, take care, and I'll talk to you all again soon with more reactions. Bye.